Everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know we have a couple more people that will be joining us here in a few minutes, but I do want to welcome everyone to the Transportation Alternatives, the Applicant Workshop. I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items first. So if you look at your screen, if you look at the bottom, I have a red box a box I've highlighted in red. Please be sure that your mics are muted. The system should automatically mute you when you enter, but sometimes it does not do that. So please be sure your mics are muted. We are going to have a large group on here today. We have 400 people registered. So please be sure your mics are muted. If you have a question, you can use the chat box feature. If you look towards the bottom right of my screen, you can see there's a little chat bubble. If you click that, it will pull up your chat box. You can submit questions through there. If you would like to submit a question just to me directly, you can send it to the WebEx host account, and I will see it and I can add it to my list of questions that we'll be sure to answer. If you want to see all the participants that are on today, you can also click the participants button. We are going to have polling questions today. So there's 3 little dots at the bottom right corner of your screen. If you click that, it should give you the option to pull up the polling window. A final thing, so your window, since you're going to have probably your chat box open and the polling window open as well, if you put your video in strip mode, which I have that box circled in red up there, if you put your video in strip mode, it should keep everything together so that way your windows aren't getting hidden behind the others. And with that, again, I just want to welcome everyone. Today for our presenters, we have Cynthia Waymack, Pamela Liston, and Jay Lindsay. They are all program managers for the Transportation Alternatives Program here in the Local Assistance Division. And so with that, I will pass it over. Well, before I do that, actually, we're going to go ahead and open up the first poll, and then I'll pass it over to Cynthia. So if you have your polling window open, you should be able to see the poll up now. The first question is, what is your experience with the Transportation Alternatives Program? Not familiar at all, have heard of it, but not very familiar. Familiar with the program, but have never completed an application before. Familiar and have applied for funding, but it was several years ago, or very familiar and have submitted multiple applications over the last couple of years. And then we also have a second question you should see. What type of projects are you considering to apply for TA funding, pedestrian, bicycle, including rail to trail and safe routes to school, restoration of a historic transportation structure, turnout, pull-off, or scenic view, or other? So I'm going to leave that open just here for a few minutes, and then I'm also going to pass it over to Cynthia, and I'll close it here in the poll here in just a moment. And Cynthia, you can go ahead and get started, and I will share the polling results here in just a second.
Okay, do you want to change the slide?
You should see the Transportation Alternatives Set Aside slide.
Well, I don't, but that's okay. I can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to get us started off this morning with going over a program overview, eligibility, program highlights, and give you a general idea of what you should consider when you're starting with a TA project. And then Pam Liston and Jay Lindsay are going to take over and tell you everything that you need to know about the preliminary application and the subsequent full application. So for some of you who maybe haven't applied for a while, if it's been a couple of years, we initiated the preliminary application in 2019. So now we have a 2-step process. So the Transportation Alternatives Program. The program is intended to fund community-based projects that improve or expand the non-motorized network and enhance the transportation experience. Next slide. Who can apply for funding? Local governments, transportation authorities, transit agencies, natural resource or public land management agencies, school districts, and tribal governments. Who is not eligible? State DOTs, MPOs, and nonprofits. Next slide. What is eligible? First, in order to be eligible to compete for the Transportation Alternative Set-Aside funding, the project must relate to surface transportation and qualify as one of the following 4 categories: transportation alternatives activities, safe routes to school activities, boulevard activities, or recreational trails activities. Boulevard activities are projects planned within former interstate routes or other divided highways. VDOT evaluates these type of projects on a case-by-case basis. So if you have one of those, contact us early so we can help guide you on them. For the recreational trails activities category, dedicated funding is available through the Recreational Trails Program, which is administered separately by the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. Next slide, please. Now we're going to take a quick look at some of the eligible activities under the Transportation Alternatives category. Since I'm just going to be touching on highlights this morning, I want to point out that on the Local Assistance Division webpage, the Transportation Alternatives Program Guide is posted. And in that document, there's a significant amount of information over project eligibility with examples, as well as some things that are not eligible, so that you can have an idea of that. So what's eligible? Pedestrian and bicycle facilities such as sidewalks, off-road trails for transportation, and bike lanes. Conversion of abandoned railroad corridors into trails. Some examples that you might be familiar with would be the Virginia Blue Ridge Rail Trail, the Crozet Tunnel Trail, and the Tobacco Heritage Trail. Also eligible are systems to improve safety, such as crosswalks and pedestrian signal heads. Next slide, please. Turnouts, overlook, and viewing areas at historic or scenic sites is eligible, as is the restoration of historic transportation structures such as train depots or tunnels. Examples of projects that would not be eligible include circular trails or facilities located only on one property or site that don't connect to existing facilities outside of the site, or if they do, the connections that are being made are not meaningful because they don't expand or improve the non-motorized infrastructure. Feasibility studies, master plans, concept plans, none of that is eligible for funding. Now, I'm going to stop talking about the transportation alternatives category for just a second and switch to the safe routes to school category, since we have 2 photos here which are examples of the safe routes to school category. That's the group of children walking with the guide, and then the pedestrian improvements, the crosswalk and the refuge there outside of the school. I don't know if you can tell that that's a school there. But if you remember from a few seconds ago, the safe routes to school activity is actually one of the 4 eligible categories under the Transportation Alternative Set-Aside. And new this year with the pre-application, you're going to see it actually listed as its own category. So the safe routes to school. Within VDOT, there are 2 divisions which help localities with safe routes to school initiatives: the Transportation and Mobility Planning Division and the Local Assistance Division. TMPD helps localities with getting programs off the ground and promoting them. The Local Assistance Division administers the safe routes to school funding opportunities, and there are 2 types of projects that qualify for funding: non-infrastructure projects and infrastructure projects. Both types of projects can be applied for using the TA applications. Some examples of non-infrastructure projects that would be eligible through Safe Routes to School include promotion or educational materials, skills training workshops, and funding for a local or regional Safe Routes to School coordinator. Examples of eligible infrastructure projects include sidewalks, flashing beacons, and traffic calming devices. Some examples of what would not be eligible would be the salary of a school crossing guard or the construction of kiss and ride pull-off areas for parents to drop their kids off. Next slide, please. All right, now on this slide, I'm going to go back to the transportation alternatives category and touch on the remaining types of eligible activities there. And what we have is the inventory, control, and removal of outdoor advertising. to getting rid of billboards, that type of thing. Vegetation management within transportation rights-of-way. So if you have invasive species or something that are getting out of control, causing sightline and safety issues, a project that would help to remove those invasives and improve the sightline and safety would be something to consider. Also, eligible or archaeological activities related to the implementation of a transportation project. So survey and inventory work, but the survey and inventory work has to be related to the implementation of a transportation project. It can't just be for the sake of survey and inventory. And then the final area is environmental mitigation. So projects for erosion and pollution control, as well as projects that would help reduce wildlife mortality and enhance and connect habitat for species. Next slide, please. All right, on this slide, what we're trying to show you is that between fiscal years 2016 and 2020, for the available transportation funding that we have available, the majority of it has gone to pedestrian and bicycle type projects, as you can see by the green columns there. Next slide, please. Right, on this slide, I'm going to switch now and stop talking about eligibility and focus on some of the program highlights that are important for you to understand. The Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Funding is federal money, which is dispersed on a reimbursement basis. The federal rate is 80%, which requires a 20% match. Two key words that I just used are federal and reimbursement. The fact that we're dealing with federal funding means you're going to have to comply with several laws and regulations that local and state projects just normally don't have to contend with. Some of the laws include NEPA, environmental justice, ADA, Davis-Bacon waging rates, Buy America, the Uniform Act, and the list truly does actually go on. Reimbursement is the second word that is important. Reimbursement simply means you must incur the cost first, and then you can receive the money. This is critical because it means there's no money up front. Also, because it's federal money, there are significant and extensive documentation requirements. In order to receive reimbursement, invoices, proof of payment, delivery tickets, material records, testing results, all of that and more is needed to justify the legitimacy of the expenditures being submitted for reimbursement. And all that documentation must be suitable for audit. So we're wanting to point this information out to you because failure to comply with the required laws and recommendation and documentation requirements means you won't get reimbursed any money at all. Or if you have received some reimbursements and then we find out later that maybe you didn't comply or there were some problems with your compliance, the result might be that you have to pay back the money that you received. Another reason why it's important to point out that it's federal money, which requires extra compliance and laws to deal with, as well as that you have these documentation requirements for reimbursement, which are extensive, is because it helps you to determine whether it's even worth it for you to go after the federal money on a particular project. You might have several projects which are suitable for TA funding, so pick the ones that make the most sense for your circumstances based on all of the expectations and requirements that come along with the federal money. Federal money's not free, and there's not a lot of it to go around. For instance, each CTB member, for each district, this upcoming cycle only has $2 million to allocate to projects. That's $1 million per fiscal year. The current CTB policy requires that if a project is selected for funding, then the CTB must award at least half of what is requested. The policy also requires selected projects to be under construction within 4 years of the initial allocation. This is important because it means if you submit an application for $1 million project and ask for $800,000, it's unlikely the full amount is going to be awarded. It's more likely that you'll only be awarded half of what you've asked for. And if you decide to move forward with that project, you need to understand that you're going to be covering the rest of the project costs with local funds. Not getting to the full amount that you requested is not going to be an excuse for not being able to meet the 4-year rule for construction. With all this in mind, it's probably not a surprise that when you're looking at the types of projects that you want to select for submitting for funding, it is a good idea to focus on the smaller, non-traditional type of transportation projects that are easier to manage and maybe not quite that expensive. Next slide, please. Okay, so you've decided that you want to apply for TA funding. Where should you start? Well, quite simply, identify a need that qualifies for funding, perform some preliminary engineering, finalize the scope, make certain that you're dealing with logical termini in a project that has independent utility, and refine your cost estimate. Easy, right? Well, one of the first things you need to do is pick your project. So how do you pick your project? And the answer to that is wisely. Go to your locality's capital improvement plan and pick an eligible project from there. If there isn't anything there, then go to the bike ped plan for your locality. If you don't have one of those, then go to the transportation section and the locality comprehensive plan. Once you pick the eligible project, then do some homework, do some preliminary engineering, get with the experts within your locality and go into the field. What do you see? Do you have wetlands, potential rare threatened and endangered species habitat, steep topography, utility complex? What do you see? When you were doing your homework, did you research the right-of-way? Do you have numerous property owners that you're going to have to consult with? If in doing your homework and going out in the field with the engineers reveals that you have some challenges and conflicts, that's okay. That's the whole point of doing this. The more you learn about what it's going to take to put your project on the ground, the better you'll be able to give us a realistic cost estimate for the project as well as the schedule. Now, a word about logical termini and independent utility. Projects being submitted for funding need to actually make sense. They need to have logical termini. So if you are submitting a project that starts a sidewalk project that starts at the intersection of 2 streets and goes mid-block and stops in front of the bank, that's not logical. If the project that you are presenting only makes sense if it's dependent upon another sidewalk being built or some other development coming in, then that's not independent utility. So pay attention to what you're dealing with and whether your project can actually stand alone as an independent utility type project. Now, with all this in mind, please do your homework. Please check with your experts. Please go out into the field. And if you have questions about anything that you're doing, give us a call. Next slide, please. All right, now the last thing that I'm going to talk to you about today is doing a self-evaluation or an assessment. And you seriously need to consider when deciding to pursue federal TA funding, whether your locality actually has the skill set, staff, and time to administer the project. Essential to whether you can consider administering a project is determining if there's a full-time person on staff within the locality who has passed VDOT's qualification program. If you don't have one, then the locality cannot administer the project. VDOT's going to have to do it for you. It's that simple. You either have someone or you don't. And if you don't, VDOT will have to administer it. And if VDOT administers it, that means that the locality must provide the 20% match upfront in cash to VDOT so we can actually start doing work on the project. Now, if you do have a qualified person on staff, you still need to seriously consider whether it's appropriate for you to administer the project. You need to be honest. Just because you can administer the project doesn't mean that you should. So take a look, really look, see how have you been? Do you have limited experience with federal funding, or has your experience not been that pleasant? It hasn't gone that well. There's been a lot of problems. or you do have a qualified person, but your staffing is limited and they're already overstretched, or you know that the project that you are submitting for funding is extremely complicated. And so if there's something like that going on, it may be in your very best interest and ours and everyone's to get the project on the ground if we actually administer it for you. So be honest with yourself as you move forward with submitting your application when you're answering those questions. So now that's the end of the program overview, the eligibility, what you should think about when getting started. We're going to, I think, go to some poll questions right now, and then Pam Liston is going to take over and talk with you about everything you need to know about the preliminary application.
Yeah, and so we can run through the first poll responses real quick. So for the first poll, looks like majority of people are pretty familiar with the program, but have just never completed an application before. So you should be able to see the results if you pull up the polling window. Yeah, so it looks like majority of people are familiar with the program. We have some that are very, very familiar and they've done multiple applications. For the what type of project are you looking to apply for funding? Overwhelming for bicycle and pedestrian, including rail to trails. Okay. All right, so I am going to go ahead and open up the next polling question. All right. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. The TA program is a reimbursement program. Funds must be spent through paying invoices before you receive the TA funds. True or false? And then federal funding for the TA program is considered recreational and therefore does not require adherence to federal transportation requirements such as Buy America and the Americans with Disability Acts. True or false? And we'll just give a few more seconds for people to respond. Okay. Pam, you should be able to see the polling results if you want to review through them with the group.
As far as the answers? Okay.
Yeah.
Question just went away. Transportation alternatives. Michaela, can you put the screen back?
Yeah, hold on. There we go.
Oh. Okay, transportation alternative set aside is a reimbursement program. Funds must be spent before receiving TA funds. That is true. As Cynthia said, you need to have that money up front. Make sure you have sufficient funds to pay the first couple invoices until you can get the reimbursement cycle going and start getting some of those reimbursements back. So it is definitely a reimbursement program. Federal funds for the TA program are considered recreational and therefore do not require adherence to the federal transportation requirements. That is false. As Cynthia said, there are a lot of federal requirements that have to be adhered to. So it is not just free money. There are rules to play by. Next slide. All right. Cynthia talked about preparation and getting, ready to apply for federal funds through the TA program. As part of that preparation, you should also check on your portal access. All applications are submitted electronically through the VDOT Smart Portal, so you need to make sure that you have the proper access. If you yourself have already submitted TA application, you should be fine. If you have submitted other funding applications, be it revenue share or smart scale, but you have not submitted an application for TA, you may want to check with your organizational administrator just to ensure that you have access to the TA application. Each program requires access to that application. So even though you may have permissions to get into the portal, you need to also have permission for the TA application. Now, if you have never submitted an application in the SMART portal, you need to contact your organizational administrator to set you up an account, to also set up your permissions. If you're not sure who that person is or that person has left, you can go to VDOT's SMART portal homepage, and there are a list of the districts and district contacts that can help you with getting access and setting up your permissions. Now, once you have your permissions, you have between May 17th and July 1st to work on your pre-application. We hope that you don't wait until July 1st and all submit at the same time. You can start working anytime after the portal opens. You can save it, you can work on it, you can make changes to it. You can do whatever you need to do on it. It is your application until you submit. Now, once you submit the application, any changes after that point, you will have to coordinate with VDOT because it then becomes in our hands, and we would have to make those changes. But anytime before then, you can make changes as you need to. Next slide. So what is the SMART portal? What does the application look like? It looks like it has in years past for those of you that have applied before. It's very similar to the other VDOT applications. There are pearls, what we call pearls along the top that move you through the different sections of the application. I did want to highlight that point of contact. This is the person that we're going to contact if we have any questions, if something's missing, if something doesn't look right. So when you put that point of contact in there, put somebody that is familiar with the project and familiar with the application so that they can assist us with our questions. Next slide. So what information is needed for the pre-application? For the TA program, the pre-application gives us a chance to look at the proposed project. What we're looking at this point is eligibility. We want to look at the scope and the proposed termini. We want to look to see if there's anything glaring or anything that looks out of place or missing. We are not scoring anything at this point. Again, we're just trying to get an idea of what the project is and what make sure that it meets all the eligibility criterias before you invest time in that full application. Next slide. Now, in addition to the project, we're looking to see who you plan to administer the project, you or yourself. In the past, we have said that VDOT would assist small localities that did not have the resources available. And we have now opened that up so that if you don't feel that you have the experience or the resources or the time to commit to meet the 4-year time limit, VDOT can administer your project for you. And we're going to ask you right up front. We want to know, what is your plan? And if the proposed project is for a sidewalk or a trail, something that's linear, and you're not sure you're ready, VDOT can administer the project on your behalf. This would include design, right-of-way, and construction. Now, if you are a larger locality and confident in your abilities and you plan to administer, then we need you to fill out a request to administer form and upload it as part of your pre-application. This is new. Other funding sources have used the request to administer for several years now. We are now incorporating it into the TA process. Now, if you don't plan to administer the project, we ask that you work closely with your local VDOT district office and coordinate with them between now and the final application submission. They can help you with determining and finalizing the scope of the project. They can discuss termini. They can assist you with the review of your cost estimate to ensure that all costs have been accounted for. Next slide. Another new question that we have added this year is the question of purpose and need. Why did you select the project and what benefits will it bring to the existing transportation network and the surrounding communities? And we ask that you be detailed in your responses, and this goes for the whole application. But if we look at this proposed response, the planned improvements will make it safer for children walking to school and attending after-school sporting events. That answers the question. It's a fine answer, but you could do a lot better. So the better response, I'll give you a second to read it. But if you read through that, you can see it provides much more detail and provides us, as people evaluating this project, it gives us a lot more information. It tells us that these sidewalks are being installed where none previously existed. You have kids that are walking in the streets. You have heavy traffic volumes, so you've got an unsafe situation. Your project is not only adding sidewalks, but it's adding crosswalks and ADA ramps. So again, you're improving in the accessibility and the safety of those facilities. The school is located in a residential area with large numbers of school children. It's a very active school and has sporting events and other student activities. So there you're telling us that it will be a much used facility, that there are a lot of children in the surrounding area, that it's a situation that if the sidewalks and safer facilities are built, that there's a good expectation that children will use these facilities. So it's a much better response. And this is what we're looking for in our responses throughout the application, is give us the information. Tell us what you know, because we don't necessarily know. Next slide. All right, tentative funding request. In the past years, we have not asked how much you're asking for. And again, it's not that we're evaluating that. What we want to do is we want to know that this is a project that fits the program. As Cynthia said, the TA program is intended for smaller, less complex projects. There is a $2 million limit per application. That part hasn't changed. Like I said, if we're looking at smaller, concise projects, a $10 million project looking for $4 million in TA funding is probably not a good fit for this program. And after reviewing this pre-application, we may come back to you with that comment that it's a little bit larger, it's maybe outside the intent of this program. Ideally, what we're looking for is something with an overall cost between maybe $1 million and $2 million, and that can be funded within 2 cycles of funding at the most. Again, we're looking for smaller projects with a very defined scope that can be constructed within the 4-year time period. So next slide. So in addition to some of the newer questions that we're asking, we have also added some new tools that we hope will help you in developing your application. The first 2, the estimate template and the scheduling tool, can be found on VDOT's website. The last one, the inflation tool, has actually been built into the application, and you will see it across funding types. You will see this tool in the revenue sharing application. You'll see it in Smart Scale. This is a new tool that's been added to all the funding applications. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of what these tools are and how you can use them, like I said, they are available on VDOT's TA website, so you can take a look at them. The estimate template is very simple. It's not fancy, but it is something that you can use. It does function. It's not mandatory, so if you have your own version of an estimate format or template, you are more than welcome to use it. We just want to use, we developed it to demonstrate the level of detail that we want to see in the cost estimate. We also used it to remind you sometimes of some of the incidental costs like VDOT oversight charges that are sometimes overlooked. So whether you use our template or develop your own, we would like to see the cost broken down by line item and phase. You'll notice there that I've identified the PE total cost. You should have total PE cost, right-of-way cost, and construction costs separate. And you should include costs for all phases, regardless of where the funding is coming from. We need this in our systems to show total project cost. We need this to evaluate the total federal participation. So we need you to show all anticipated costs. Now, if you have funding from other sources, just identify that, keep that separate, and show that it is being provided by another funding source separate from the TA request. But as an example, sometimes we will see that localities will use their own funds to pay for PE and design, and that's fine, but we still need to see those costs. But even if you're using local funds for PE, you should still have a small amount shown for TA participation to cover the anticipated VDOT costs. So even if you are covering the design costs, there's still going to be oversight by VDOT. We'll still have plan reviews to do. We'll still have environmental coordination to do. So even if y'all are paying for PE out of your own costs, there's still some VDOT participation in it, and you should still include those costs as part of your budget. So the estimate, as always, should be uploaded and attached as part of your submittal. Again, regardless if you use our template or your own template, we need to see that cost estimate. And again, what we're looking at is we're looking at the line items. We're looking at, have you missed anything? Do we see ineligible items in it? The district's going to be looking for reasonableness. Does it look really low? Maybe something's missing. Maybe your costs are, outdated. So those are the things we're looking at. Next slide. Scheduling tool. We have seen this forever. Our applicants sometimes are a little optimistic about how quickly they can get a federal aid project through design and out on the street. And so what we've done here is we've added a scheduling tool just to give you an idea of the standard time it takes to do a federal aid project. The scheduling tool was developed, in fact, by one of our districts. They've used it with their local projects and found it helpful. So we've decided that we would like to share it with all of you. It is required. We ask that you fill in, you'll notice the anticipated start date. When do you plan on starting project development? And it will calculate then an anticipated advertisement date and construction start date as well as completion date. So if you look at the example here, if you estimate starting February 1st of 2023, based on historical durations, this project should be advertised or ready for advertisement in August of 2026. So it does take some time to go through project development and get a project ready for advertisement. As I said, this tool is mandatory. We ask that you print it upload it and include it as an attachment to your pre-application submittal. Next slide. Inflation tool. Like I just said, it takes some time to get through project development. So an estimate that you do today is not necessarily a true realistic estimate of the cost a couple years down the road. So the inflation tool takes some of that into account. It also looks at risk, it looks at contingencies, it makes sure that these costs, again, that sometimes are overlooked, are included. And so that we get a more realistic expectation for that total cost of the project. Too often we see estimates start out very optimistic, and then once funding is awarded and engineering begins, we find that the costs are inadequate, that additional funding is needed, sometimes to the point that the project can't move forward because it is so woefully underfunded. So what we're hoping is that this inflation tool will help provide a better assessment of the funding that will be needed. You'll see that it asks for anticipated start dates and the basic cost estimate for each phase. It will go PE right away and construction phase, which is where your estimate comes in handy, and your scheduling tool will come in handy by providing anticipated start dates for each of the phases. Now, because this is a new tool and no guidance has been provided as of yet, we're not making this mandatory. As I said, it is part of the application. You can use it. Again, I think it gives an interesting take on the costs, but it will be mandatory for the full application. Hopefully by that time we will have some guidance out and more usage, so we'll be more familiar with it. Y'all will be more familiar with it. So it will be required on the full application. Like I said, at your pre-app, it is not required, but it is there for you to use. Next slide. Third-party contribution plan. We used to call it in-kind match. Those of you that have been with us for a while are very familiar with in-kind match. The proper term, though, reading federal regulations, is third-party contribution. And you can use third-party contributions to pay for all or part of your 20% local match. Again, at this point, what we're trying to do is look at eligibility. What we have found is for localities that plan on using these donations, it's very important that we can get an eligibility determination upfront and as early as possible. To find out after the project's been awarded funding that your anticipated match is not valid or eligible can be devastating. So we ask, if you are anticipating the use of third-party contributions or donations, that you fill out the information. We understand that it's an estimate, we understand it's anticipated, but at least give us an opportunity to look at it and see if we feel that it's eligible. Two important points. You cannot use, and I think Cynthia brought this up earlier as well, that you cannot use third-party contributions if VDOT is administering the project. So if VDOT is administering the project, you will need to come up with a plan to finance that 20% local match. You cannot use donations. Unfortunately, that doesn't help us when we're trying to make our budget whole. So we need that cash for the match. Second point I want to make is the donations must come from a third party. So it cannot be a donation that you are making, you as the applicant and the recipient. It cannot be a donation that VDOT is making as a pass-through. It has to be a true third-party contribution. So I know in the past we have allowed staff time and considered that as an in-kind donation, but that is an eligible reimbursement cost, and those should be submitted for reimbursement. So we're looking for true third-party donations. Next slide. And this is the plan. It's a simple spreadsheet. Again, it's available on our website, but it's just a way for you to identify what your plan is, what your anticipated donations are, to give us an opportunity to look at it and comment on it. If we want to look at let's look at the third line there, the construction donation. Let's assume we take an example that we've got the Boy Scouts coming out to do some clearing on the trail. So it is Boy Scouts, third party. It is a donation. They're not being paid. So it asks, what's the activity? It's trail construction. The donation is the clearing. Who's providing it? It's totally volunteer. And then it asks you, where are you coming up for the value? How are you determining the value of this match? In this case, we're going to use the Davis-Bacon wage rates. You can use any documented source. It could be wage rates. It could be hourly rates. Google volunteer hours, you can find an hourly rate. It just has to be something that's documented. You can use Forest Service. They have a good system for valuing volunteer time. So we just asked, where are you getting this from? So in this case, they're going to propose using Davis-Bacon wage rates. And so we ask you, okay, what value are you giving it? In this case, it's $15.50 an hour. What we want to know there is we want to be sure that we're providing a rate that is comparable to the skill or activity being provided. So in this case, we've got Boy Scouts, they're unskilled laborers, so you're going to give an unskilled laborer cost. You would not give a professional backhoe operator or skilled laborer cost in that example. So again, we're asking you, what are you tentatively planning on valuing this donation at? So $15.50 an hour, an estimate of 160 hours, gives you a donation value of $2,480. So again, we want an opportunity to look at it, to comment on it. If we have any concerns, we want to address it early. We want to make sure that what you're proposing is something that we can use if the project is funded. Next slide. So for your pre-application, what do you need to attach? All projects require a cost estimate. You can use our template or you can choose to use your own template. That is fine. Again, we ask you to break it down by all developmental phases, PE, right-of-way, construction. If you can provide line items and quantities, we would like to see that as detailed as possible. A sketch. All projects require a sketch. We want to see especially the beginning and ending termini. We want to see any connections being made. If you tell us it's connecting to this wonderful trail, we want to see that connection. Show us in a sketch how it is actually going to connect to that trail. Show us those termini. Cynthia talked about logical termini. We want to see that, you know, a proposed sidewalk or proposed trail is actually moving people from one place to another, that they're not stopping and leaving them mid-block. Or we've seen some where applications propose, you know, stopping the sidewalk at the town limits. Well, you can't just stop a sidewalk at town limits. What happens to your pedestrians and your bicyclists? They're kind of stranded there. So we want to see that you're proposing beginning and ending points that make sense and provide a safe facility for the users. So cost estimate, sketch, Your schedule, I talked about, you do need to use our scheduling tool. It's based on, like I said, years of experience developing federal aid projects. So we would like to see you use that. Again, it's nothing to be evaluated on. You're not being held to it. It's just we want to see the anticipated time frame, and again, look at it in comparison to maybe some of the prices and your inflation tool. We'd like to see you use it in that as well. So those three things have to come with every pre-application. Request to administer. If you are planning to administer this project, if it is funded, you need to submit a request to administer. It's basically a self-evaluation or assessment of your experience, your training, projects that you've done. So that would be required if you are planning to administer. If you're planning to use third-party donations, we would need you to also submit a third-party donation plan again. So we have an opportunity to look at these costs and to evaluate eligibility. Next slide. So the pre-application, like I said, the portal opens May 17th. You have until July 1st to work on your pre-application. So once you turn it in, and again, the earlier you turn it in, the earlier we get to look at it and the earlier you get it back. So please don't wait till the last minute. But once you turn it in, VDOT begins its evaluation process. The validation process is performed by both district and central office staff, and it can be done concurrently, so it doesn't take any longer. Both of us will be looking at it at the same time. If we have any questions during the evaluation, we will reach out to the point of contact that you have identified. We will give you every opportunity. We will work with you. If you need to update an estimate, if we find that something's been missing, you can update it during this process, or we can, if we find that, say, termini do not appear to be logical termini, we can work with you and hopefully find a solution that can help this application move forward. So it's very much a give and take process here. We will have all validations completed no later than August 15th, even if we don't see it until July 1st, we will get it done by August 15th. And you will be notified that your full application is ready to begin. And then you have that opportunity to start working on the full application. But that is what the validation process is. Actually, when we validate, when we push that button and validate, what the system does is it takes that pre-application and clones it, and it now becomes the full application. And that's what's available then when you go out to start working on your full application. And as part of that process, we will lock the scope, which is your project description, and we will lock the termini. So you cannot change those two features in the full application. And the reason we do that is eligibility. We have made this review, we have evaluated it, we feel that it's an eligible project. We've removed anything that we can identify as ineligible, and we don't want these things to sneak back in, or sometimes we see scope, somebody gets a great idea and they add something to it later. Well, we don't want to take the chance of eligibility being eliminated or impacted. So if you do need to make a change on your full application to the scope or the termini, we can do that. It just means that you need to coordinate with VDOT so that we can, again, make sure that that eligibility is maintained. Next slide. All right, so we've got a pre-application. It's been submitted. It's been validated. You've been told you're free to go, move forward. You have until October 1st to work on your full application. So this is what you're doing. You're incorporating any comments or recommendations from the validation process. You're performing a site visit if you haven't already done so. Hopefully you've already done that. You're updating quantities and design, cost estimates, updating your schedule. The two biggest things I want to point out here is make sure that you have scheduled council meetings and board meetings so that you have your resolutions in time. Make sure that you've scheduled your public hearing, and Jay's going to talk more about that. But it's so important to get those items on agendas early. Don't wait till the last minute. Do that as soon as you can. Next slide. Safe routes to school. Cynthia talked about safe routes to school. It has always been part of the TA program. And it is eligible for TA funding. It can be done as a TA funded project, or it can be pursued specifically as a safe route to school project. And if you want to pursue it as safe routes, you need to show that you've got the involvement and participation and support of the local school. So you will, by the time you submit your full application, you will need to have a letter of support from the school principal. You'll need to include that with your full application. So that's something you need to work on ahead of time. You also need to have the other information. How many kids are walking and biking? How many kids live within that radius? Those are things that you need to have the information available when you are getting ready to prepare your final application. Again, that is if you are going to pursue it as a safe route to school. And we would like to see you do that. Our board members are interested in safe routes to school. They like to fund those projects. So if you can submit and pursue it as a safe routes to school project, we would like to see that. You do get some additional scoring for it. And like I said, the board members are always interested in asking about that. Next slide. And we have a couple polling questions for you, Michaela. So the questions we've got here is, VDOT can administer the project if it is a sidewalk or trail project. Is that true or false? Second question, project cost estimate should include all costs or costs for all developmental phases, even if TA funding is only being used for construction. Is that true or false? And if you'll take a few minutes and quickly answer those questions, we can move on. All right, quickly, let's see. VDOT can administer the project if it is a sidewalk or trail. True. Like I said, we used to require or only offer that for the smaller localities, but if it is a linear project, one that VDOT, we do trails and sidewalks all the time. So something that we can do, we will administer it on your behalf. Project costs should include all developmental phases. That is true. We need that for our systems. We need that to show full project cost, even if TA funding is not the sole source of participation. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, and he's going to go over the full application.
Thanks, Pam. Hi, everybody. This is Jay, and we'll be discussing the full application. The first thing to note about the full application is that it is due October 1st, 2021. That's the deadline. New for this cycle, you can't submit your full application without the following attachments: a resolution of support, evidence of public participation or information meeting, endorsement from the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, and the only exception to that is Nova's COG. As Pam mentioned, you're going to want to have your board or council schedule their meeting early enough to meet this October 1st date. because again, it's the deadline. So please make sure you're scheduling that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's take a look at your funding. How do you plan to fund the entire project? What's the total TA funding that you anticipate? What is the total local match requirement? That's going to be calculated automatically based on what you put in for anticipated TA funding. Is there any other project funding on the project? And then again, this will automatically calculate the total project cost. One other really important thing, what amount of federal TA funding is going to be requested on this application? Is there TA funding on previous applications for this project? And do you plan to apply for future TA funds, not in this cycle? And so that's really important for us to know, both the total and what amount of the total is going to be on this application. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at a word problem and kind of figure out what amounts we would use here. So we're looking at a project with an estimated cost of $3 million. There's no additional funding available. They're planning to use 80% of the possible TA funding. Again, that's 80% of the project, or $2.4 million in federal funds. Remember, the maximum request per application is $2 million. That's 1 million per fiscal year. So with that in mind, what would you put for the two blanks here? Federal TA funding and other project funding. I'll give you a second to think about it, and then we'll hop to the next slide and see what the answer is. Next slide, please. So here is the answer. Remember, there's no additional funding available. You're only allowed to request $2 million per application. So if the total anticipated TA funding is going to be $2.4 million and there's no other funding, the maximum can only be $2 million this application. Remember, that's it for one application. So it's not going to cover everything on one, but as you can see, they're requesting the maximum. Next slide, please. Now we're going to take a look at the scoring criteria that happened on the full application, starting with project funding. We've talked about this a little bit. Is the cost estimate accurate? Have all of the phases, all three phases, been adequately addressed? And did you include administration and oversight costs? Those add up and they should be considered. Are the costs broken down into specific line items? And this is important for a few reasons. One, we want to make sure that what we're looking at is reasonable, and it makes it a lot easier. Two, projects change over time, and it's a lot easier to change the project if you know the specific line item costs, as opposed to having some sort of bulk number there. Does the estimate appear reasonable based on the project description and current trends? And this is important as well. Does it include the inflation factor? We're talking about multiple year projects here of decent amounts of money. So inflation does add up. This next one I think is the most important one. Were updates made based on validation comments? The validation comments are the central office and district going through and trying to identify problems for you that we think would result in issues in the final application. So please take those seriously and address them. It can be a real project killer if we found something early and mentioned it in validation and it's still there in the full application. Another important part of funding is the match. Is that going to be in cash, or will you be using third-party donations, what we call in-kind? Are you pretty sure that those proposed donations are eligible based on what we allow for in-kind? It can really kill the project if you come in expecting to use a third-party donation and then find out that it's not an eligible type. And then finally, is the TA funding reasonable? Does the project fit the intent of the TA program? Remember, we were saying maybe this isn't the best one for a giant mega project. has the full project cost been addressed? We like to see projects through. So if it looks like this isn't going to help get a project all the way done, that's going to weigh on us when we're looking at it. Next slide, please. So here is a sample question from the funding Pearl on the application. Are there funding sources beyond the federal TA and local match proposed? Explain how you plan to fund the project as identified by the stated termini and what alternatives have been explored. And I'll let you take a look at this question for a second before we go into why it's a good answer. Okay, so you can see in here that they've identified additional funds that are available and also committed. So these aren't just local funds that they're looking at. These are local funds that they've committed by the town council. So there's good as on the project if it gets selected here. They've also applied for $400,000 in revenue sharing funds. And they have a backup plan. If those funds are not awarded, they've already started talking to the county about additional funds. On top of all of that, they seem to have identified a potential donation of aggregate material estimated at around $75,000 for the trail base. And they haven't just identified it, they've documented it in the attached letter. So for all of those reasons, this is a great little paragraph of information for us. It gives us everything we need to know. Well, not everything, but it gives us a lot of what we need to know about how this project will be funded. Next slide, please. So here is a word problem based on what we just looked at. And the response is down there at the bottom, so you can check it. Based on the response, what amount could be used on the application where it asks for other project funding? So remember, we've got $100,000 in local funds that's been committed. We've applied for $400,000 in revenue sharing funds, and there's an estimated $75,000 in-kind donation here. Next slide, please. And you can see this was a little bit of a trick question because remember that revenue sharing is a 50-50 split. So the answer is $975,000 because you've got the $100,000 of local funding that's been committed beyond the federal match. 400 plus 400,000 equals the revenue sharing amount if awarded. And then there's a possible local match being covered by donation. So additional available funding then equals $975,000. And that's assuming everything goes right and goes well, that's the number, but that gives you an idea of what we're looking for there. Next slide, please. The next piece of the scoring criteria is project concept. This is where we want to know if you've done your homework on this project at all. Have you investigated different issues and anticipated costs? So some of the important things here: does the project have a well-defined finite scope? Have the future phases been separated out? Have you made it clear that the costs are only for this segment or phase? Again, we kind of talked about that earlier, but we really need to be clear on what amount is being asked for here and that you've thought about what the other parts of the project are going to be. Have ADA design standards been specified and prepared for? And a really good example for that is if there's a sidewalk that's going to be put in there and there's not enough material for a 5-foot sidewalk, we're going to start to wonder if you really thought about ADA when you were doing the design work on this one. This next one is really important. Does the proposed improvement meet a transportation need? And we do see projects all the time that are great projects that we wish we could get involved in. But if it doesn't have a transportation need, there's nothing to hang our hat on with that. So it has to meet a transportation need. And it would be in your best interest to make sure we see what that transportation need is, just so that we can really feel confident in selecting a project. Finally, are there any ineligible costs and have they been separated out and has the funding source been identified? Two common examples for that are road diets and paving. There's nothing wrong with paving. We're all for it, but it's not an eligible cost. So we want to see that you're not accidentally including those costs in what you think TA is going to pay for. And we want to see that you have some sort of plan to pay for those ineligible costs to make sure that the project gets finished. Next slide, please. So here is a sample question from the project concept Pearl. And you can see they're asking here how the project will comply with ADA standards, since that's required with federal TA funds. And take a look at the answer. I'll give you a second. So this is a great answer. We can see a few places where they've really taken ADA into account. They're planning and designing for a 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk, a 10-foot wide pedestrian bridge. They plan to go adjacent to the street and follow the slope of the street. They have plans for a 2-foot wide grass utility strip, and they're already aware that there's going to be an issue with the stone retaining wall and intend to pursue a design waiver. So again, in one small paragraph, giving us a lot of information where we can be confident that they understand the issues and that they're incorporating the issues into the design. So again, just a great answer in a pretty short amount of information. Next slide, please. The next piece of our scoring criteria is how the project improves the transportation network. What and whom does the project benefit? Does this project provide connectivity to existing transportation facilities? Is it providing a missing link in the transportation network? Please explain how, if that's the case. Again, we don't always know these areas, so details and explanations there are important for us. Does the project provide facilities where none existed? Why was the location chosen? There has to be a reason that you want work done here. Fill us in, help us understand why this is an important spot for the work to be done. Will the project serve multiple neighborhoods, schools, or places of work? Will it get pedestrians or bicyclists to public transportation? Are there going to be safety improvements included? Is this project going to help people's safety? Is the project specifically named in the local or regional transportation plan? And again, I think the key word there is specifically. It doesn't necessarily have to be the exact termini, but please, fill in those blanks for us, connect the dots, let us see how it's referenced in the local or regional transportation plan. Maybe consider including that document, or at least that portion of the document, so we can see what you're talking about. Finally, does this project provide improvements to underserved communities? And in case you're wondering, FHWA defines underserved communities as a broad category that includes minority and low-income populations, but may also include many other demographic categories that face challenges engaging with the transportation process and reaping equitable benefits. And these can include children, the elderly, and the disabled. Next slide, please. So here is a sample question from the network, Improved Transportation Network Pearl. Does the project install facilities where none existed before? Why was this location chosen? Go ahead and take a look. I'll give you a second. Okay, this answer again is an example of a good one. It provides a lot of information that we're asking for. The project does provide facilities where none existed before. We can see it was chosen because there is visual and observational evidence that large numbers of people use that location to get to a shopping area that has a grocery store and a medical clinic. And we can see that it connects 3 adjacent neighborhoods. So that's a lot of information about what we've asked, again, in just a pretty small amount of writing. Next slide, please. The next scoring criteria is the project's readiness to proceed. This is kind of similar to concept in that we want to know what steps you've taken, what homework you've done. Has the site visit been performed and evaluated for possible challenges and areas that may need additional investigation and hidden costs? Which experts came on that site visit? Who was there? What perspectives were represented? Will design be done in-house or will procurement be required for that? What conceptual design, master plan, or engineering work has been completed? And remember, if this is all done before the application, that may not be reimbursable work there, but we'd like to know what you've done. Has the required right-of-way been identified, and has any been secured? And do you have any evidence of that? And again, I'd like to invite you to include any evidence in your application as an attachment. Again, we don't know these areas, so details and documents are crucial. Next slide, please. The next sample question is from the readiness to proceed Pearl. Has the locality performed a site visit? And go ahead and take a quick look at that, and then I'll explain it. So you can see that this is what I consider to be a good example of an answer for this question. Yes, there was a site visit. It was done very recently. You can see that they brought multiple subject experts along. You've got a city engineer, a planner, a bike pedestrian coordinator, a manager, and a city maintenance engineer. They walked the entire trail and site. They identified the need for drainage structures, which has been incorporated into the design. They assessed the terrain for ADA and slope and width and clearance. They identified a few trees that are going to have to be removed, and they found a spot where the alignment includes crossing of national park property. They have already scheduled a meeting with the park ranger about a permit or easement. So you can see there's been a lot of homework done, a lot of experts involved. This is the kind of answer we're looking for. They're really being proactive and trying to identify and solve problems in advance. Next slide, please. And this next piece of the scoring criteria is new, so this should be interesting to everybody, even if you're a veteran of the program. Does the project reach beyond local boundaries? Does it cross jurisdictional lines? If so, has coordination begun with other jurisdictions and agencies involved? Pam mentioned this earlier. We want to make sure that, if something goes across the lines, you're not just stranding people at the border. That's not how TA works. We want to see cooperation and coordination. Is there a marketing strategy being developed? Is there a board or committee in place to oversee development and the marketing of the planned improvements and upkeep? Finally, what are the anticipated benefits to the surrounding communities? You're telling us that it has a regional significance. What is that regional significance? Is it purely transportation? Is there economic development? Is it going to help tourism? Again, we don't know these areas as well as you do. So we really need details and context to make an informed decision. Next slide, please. This sample question on regional significance is, it's an example question, but as you can see down at the bottom of this one, questions about regional significance are contained within multiple pearls. So this is going to be in a few places in the application. Is the project located within multiple jurisdictions? Take a look at this response. And I think this is a great response. They even say in here, no, it doesn't cross multiple jurisdictions, but it connects directly to the existing trail that does. They've included trail maps identifying those segments and demonstrating the connections. They've already coordinated with the city and the county. The Swift River Trail Foundation provides upkeep and oversight on the trail, and has been included. Additionally, it looks like the new segments are going to get to piggyback on the existing website and marketing plan. But we also know that the county will be providing maintenance of the segment. So it looks like everybody's taking responsibility for the important parts and working together. This is, again, I think it's a great answer. You know, while it maybe feels bad to have to say no to one of these questions, they're making the most of it here. No, it doesn't cross multiple jurisdictions, but it connects and still provides significance. Again, we don't know the areas, so that level of detail and context really helps us, especially the maps that they're including. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up what I've been saying, what makes a good application? Hopefully we've made it clear that it's details. Details are critical to our ability to score these projects. We don't always know the area. Even if we kind of know your district, we might not know the specific site. We certainly don't know it as well as you do. So don't count on us to know things. You really, if something's important to the project, you really want to make sure to get it across to us in writing, and if possible, visually with maps and sketches, a detailed cost estimate. As I mentioned earlier, try and do as much of that as line items as you can. That really helps. We need clear and logical termini so we know what we're looking at and talking about. Hopefully I've shown you why it's important to answer all the questions fully. We need that information. You're trying, to some extent, you're trying to sell us on a project, and we're getting a lot of these. So please show us why it's important and what you're doing. Support documentation for additional funding, right-of-way, and donations. Again, we believe you, but we need the documents so we can really see the specifics and be confident in everything. And finally, pictures. Again, we don't know these areas as well as you do. Show us what you're thinking, show us what you're planning, and we'll have a way more informed opinion and way more informed scoring of your application. Next slide, please. And that gets us to the polling questions. Thank you.
Hey, yes, so I have the poll open now. The first one, true or false, the local resolution and public hearing documentation can be found after the application deadline as long as it is as long as it's received by December 1st of 2021, true or false. If you are constructing, sorry, I have other screens that's covering. If you're constructing a large project, you can apply for and carry over funding for the next phase as long as the identified termini, the start, end, are clear, true or false. Give just a few more seconds for y'all to get those answers in. Okay, and you should be able to see the polling results displayed now. So for the first one, Jay, if you want to review through the answers, you should be able to see the polling results as well to see how everyone responded.
Okay, so for the first one, let's see, sorry, my screen's all squished. Looks like most people did not give an answer. False was the correct answer for the first one. Remember, we need everything by October the 1st. And then for the second question, it looks like most folks gave the correct answer, which was true. You can break it up, but please let us know. Keep the right termini and be clear which funding is for this phase.
Jay, I want to jump in there.
Yeah.
The intent of the question was if you're constructing a large project, you can apply for and carry over funding for the next phase. The implication here being is you can apply for multiple phases at one time, and that is not true. That would be false. We are asking you to define a scope and define a termini and apply for just that funding. Question may not have been as clear maybe as it should have been, but the intent here was to talk about the need to phase projects early. Before you submit applications, go ahead and find out what your logical termini are and create multiple projects. Don't try to fund multiple phases within one application. So that might have been a little misleading. But the answer there the intended answer is false, that you should apply for one project with very clear termini, and when that project is done, it's done. That money goes into the balance entry account for the next, application. And Michaela, if you want to go ahead and switch to the next slide, we can wrap it up. I know we have a lot of questions that have been submitted, and we'll get to those, but here is a list of resources. There are a lot of websites and resources out there to get additional information on Transportation Alternatives Program. Safe Routes website is very good, gives information on the Safe Routes to School program. I will highlight on the Transportation Alternatives website, we have our TA program guide, which is in the process of being updated. And that is a good source of information. It goes over the program as well as the process. So there are a lot of sources here. Next slide. If you can't find what you need online, you can call any of us, myself, Jay, Cynthia, or Kathy Graham, who heads up the Safe Routes to School program here with VDOT. I wanted to also comment, I think all of us touched on the need for detail. And when we score these applications, when we look at that final application, a lot of our scoring is done on a sliding scale. So a question may score anything from 0 to 20. And if you give us a standard yes, no answer, you're going to get that, low score. If you give us answers like what Jay went through, you're going to get the 20 points. So big difference there, scoring 1 or 2 versus 20. So provide the detail. Give us as much detail as you can. You'll notice in some of those responses, it even talked about things planned for the future. Well, that still counts. That shows that the coordination is being done, the discussions are being had, that all the answers may not be known right now, but you're aware of them, you're looking for solutions and resolutions. So be detailed so we can get you those scores, those points that you deserve. Again, just to wrap up, pre-applications are due no later than July 1st. The full application or final application is due no later than October 1st. We anticipate, hopefully, we won't have another COVID year, but we anticipate tentative selections being made in March of 2022. Again, we are also looking for additional federal legislation or another continuing resolution. We do have an extension of 1 year, so we do have the FY23 funding available, but we're hoping that another either new federal bill will be approved or another resolution passed to get us that second year of funding, but we are moving forward regardless. So submit your requests anticipating the full funding package. And final selections, again, provided we don't have any changes, will be June of 2022. The final selections go along with the department's 6-year program. So kind of follow along there and see what's going on with the program. And that's where our final selections will be made as well. So June of 2022, and then the federal year starts October 1st. So you're looking at October of 2022 to start these projects. And Michaela, with that, I don't know how you want to approach the questions that we've been getting. I don't know if you want to read them and we answer them, or how you want to do that.
Yeah, we can do that. So all the questions that came in through the chat box, I have pulled them. I'm just seeing if I have any more that came through. Sure. At the very end. Okay, nope. Okay, looks like I got them. All right, so we're gonna go all the way to the top. So the first question we received, could a local unit of government or other eligible entity apply on behalf of a nonprofit?
Yes, as long as the eligible entity submits the application, signs the agreement, makes that commitment to administer the project, or VDOT administers the project, that can be done. So a nonprofit can partner with an eligible entity.
The next question we had, it asked, how about a mid-block pedestrian crosswalk? This was during Cynthia, so probably having to do with eligibility.
Right. They're talking about a logical termini. If the mid-block, and keep in mind what we're looking at, logical termini and independent utility has to do with, is it beneficial? Can it stand alone? If no other project or work is done, do we have a usable facility? So if your mid-block crossing is your proposed termini, if that crossing takes you across to another sidewalk that continues and, you know, provides a facility for the users, that would be an acceptable termini. If it crosses mid-block and leaves you stranded and there's no sidewalk to take you anywhere on the other side, then that would not be considered logical termini. The other thing to consider too is, if you have, the way I look at it, if I look at a project that's proposing, say, multi-use trail. So multi-use is, you've got bicycles, you've got pedestrians, skateboarders on this facility. And then it ends, even if it ends with connection to a sidewalk, what are you doing with the bicyclists and the skateboarders? Is there an alternative? Does that termini provide a bicycle lane that the bicyclists now have an alternate means of transportation? So you can't leave any of your users stranded. So keep that in mind. Even if you're proposing logical termini, you need to make sure you're taking care of all your users. So next question.
Okay. What were the 2 items you mentioned not eligible under TAP?
Just following when that came up, I think that might be referring to when Cynthia was talking about circular trails and trails within a property. Those, even though they qualify as pedestrian uses, they're not meeting the transportation function, and this is transportation money. So we cannot participate in circular trails or trails within a museum park or a recreational sports facility. Trails that take you from one ball field to the next are not transportation facilities. So those would not be considered eligible for TA funding. I hope that's the answer. If not, maybe the person that submitted that can submit a follow-up question if I didn't answer.
The next question is, will VDOT LAP aid with documentation management process?
I'm going to take that to be the question is, will LAD assist in documentation management in the sense of, will we assist in record keeping? And that would not be correct. Record keeping is sole responsibility of the applicant or the locality. If an audit, if you're asked to produce documentation, that is all on you. That's project diaries, that's invoices, that's payment documents, that's materials tickets. All of that is a responsibility of the locality. Now, if VDOT is administering, they will keep those records and turn them over to you. But if you're administering the project, you're in charge of keeping the project records. Hopefully that answered that question.
All right. The next one is, the set aside program different from the overall TA program?
Say that again.
Is the set aside program different from the overall TA program?
Okay. TA, Transportation Alternative Set Aside, is the formal name provided in the federal legislation. And basically what that is saying is, within the overall surface transportation block grant funds, there is a set aside amount for TA activities. Those TA activities include TA, safe routes to school, recreational trails, and boulevard improvements. So the TA set aside is the overall umbrella under which all this funding and activities fall. Next question.
Do the at-large members of the CTB also have funds to allocate, or just district reps?
Go ahead, Michaela, do you have that last slide that we have? I think slide 57. All right, this is an example of how the funding works. There is a TA set aside amount. In this case, in this example, let's look at that as the 21.9 million. That is 1 year's allocation. Off the top of that, the Rec Trails program, because it is administered by another entity, it is administered by DCR, they get that money off the top. So they get their 1.5 million or whatever their set aside is, goes right off the top. So then we're left with 20.4 million to apply or allocate to the TA program being administered and applied for now. And per the legislation, what the legislation says is that you will divide that and equally distribute it. Half of it will go to population areas, half of it can go anywhere statewide. So the half that can go anywhere statewide, that 10.2 million, we give 1 million of that to each of the 9 district CTB members. And they focus that money on their district, their regional area, Lynchburg, Salem, Northern Virginia, Culpeper. And they're going to focus that money in those areas. And they don't have to worry about population. They don't have to worry about meeting any guidelines. They will, in general, they will follow, our ranking, and they will usually try to apply the money to those projects that need it most readily. Those that are ready to go to construction, those are already in construction that are falling short, they will apply the money there first. They will try to then fully fund projects that did not get everything they asked for before. And then on the other side, you have that 10.2 million that we have to spread amongst the population areas, less than 5,000, between 5 and 200, and then the urban areas. And there is money left in both of those columns. And that is the money that the at-large members and the secretary get. So there is this last group, and they're the last ones to select. Our CTB district members go first. The MPO in the urban areas, they will usually coordinate with the district members, and together they will fund projects. And then at the end, the CTB members and the secretary come together as a group, and they look at the statewide, and they look for any gaps where the district members or the MPOs couldn't quite fully fund a request. They will try to fully fund it. They will look for gaps statewide. So if your urban areas to the east tended to get a bulk of the funding, they will then turn to the west and try to make sure that the funding is distributed amongst all areas of the state. So yes, the at-large members play a role, and they go through, they make sure, again, the population areas are committed and covered, that we've met the legislation requirements, and then they will fill in gaps as they see fit statewide. The next question.
Can CBDG funds be used, be used for a match? I am guessing no.
You would be wrong. That is community block grant money. It's a federal program run by HUD, Housing and Urban Development, that have federal grants available. We've seen this used in coordination with TA funds for streetscape restorations, for historic district restoration, for historic buildings, which we don't do too often anymore, but that is federal grant money that can be used to match, because yes, it's federal, but it's not transportation. Now, the key though, for any grant monies, recreational trails money, even though that is transportation money, the legislation specifically says that can match TA money as well. So there's all kinds of weird little things that go on, but and ask us if you have any questions. Again, ask us ahead of time, and we will try to get those answers for you. But the key with the HUD money or CBG, the block grant money, is that it has to be eligible activities. So if the block grant money is being used to improve sanitary sewer systems or water lines within a historic district, no, it cannot be used as match. If it is being used, though, for sidewalks, road widening, street signs, facades, possibly, then maybe it can be used to match. But it has to be documented. You have to be able to show us, and this is where we get into trouble, is you have to be able to show us what that money is being used for and what you were reimbursed for with that block grant money. You have to be able to show us, and we have to understand that it is an eligible item that we could have reimbursed in order for it to be applied as match. So if you have that instance, or you're thinking that might be an option, talk to us early, talk to us during the pre-app situation, include that as part of your third-party donation plan, and let's talk about it early. Next.
Okay. The next one, I think this is probably a question regarding the qualification program, but can PDC staff count for full-time staff in lieu of the locality? Do you want me to answer that, Pam?
Go ahead.
Okay, so for the qualifications program, the only way the PDC staff would be able to hold that qualified status is if they're the one signing the agreement. So whoever has signed the agreement for the project must have the qualified staff person. So no, the PDC could not count for the full-time staff in lieu of the locality if the locality has signed the agreement. The next question we have is, does it require an RTA? And I know we did cover this, but I know that this is new this year. So if you just want to touch on it again.
Okay. Part of the pre-application, we're going to ask you straight out, who do you plan on administering this project? So if you're requesting funding and the project is selected, do you as the locality or whoever plan to administer the project? If you do, then you need to go to our website, and it can be found either on the LAD site or the TA site. You can get a request to administer form, and it's going to ask you to identify who your responsible person is. It's going to ask who is your proposed project manager, what experience do you have, what federal projects have you completed recently. It's going to ask you if you have a financial system that would meet federal audit. It will ask you basic information, all of it based on federal regulation. And that information then will be reviewed by our district staff. They're out there with you. They've dealt with you on a daily basis. They will evaluate whether or not you meet the qualifications and would qualify to administer a federal aid project based on what you're basically your self-evaluation. So you're submitting a request to administer if you want to or plan to administer the project. If you don't feel that you're qualified or you would like to see VDOT administer it, it's a sidewalk project, you've talked to VDOT, coordinated with VDOT, and the plan is for VDOT to administer the project, then you do not need to submit a request to administer. You just answer the question that says, do you plan to administer? And you would say no. And then a question will pop up and it'll say, have you coordinated with VDOT? And you say yes or no. So a request to administer form is only required if you plan to administer the project yourself. And it's required when you submit that pre-application. Okay, hopefully that answered that.
All right, the next question, what does an independent utility project mean?
And I think I talked about this a little bit when I talked about the mid-block crosswalk. Independent utility means, and we see this a lot with projects that are so big that the locality will break them down into phases. They will do from A to B for one project and then continue with another application for B to C. What we need to be able to look at is say, okay, from A to B, if I don't ever do any more work, the funding dries up, priority changes, no more work is done on that project. It doesn't go any further than A to B. Is that a usable sidewalk or a usable trail or a usable facility? Does it provide independent utility? Can it be used as a standalone? Does it get people from one place safely to another? It can also be looked at as a historic structure. We have train stations that, oh my goodness, if you're doing a historic restoration, can run into millions. So you might do, okay, first phase is going to be, I'm going to relocate it. So that's one phase. And then the next phase is I'm going to do the exterior. If you're going to relocate this falling down building with holes in the ceiling and broken windows, and you've relocated it, that is not independent utility. That is not a usable facility. So yes, you completed a phase, but it is not independent utility. And Federal Highways would look at that as the whole project in that case would be to restore the building. And so to Federal Highways, that would be a situation where the project was not complete. It is not a usable facility. We would be in a position of possible payback of federal dollars used if that project were to stop. So that's what independent utility is.
All right, the next question is there now a qualification program? I have managed TEP and RTP grant projects, but have not needed a qualification before. How do I sign up for this program? So yeah, so beginning January 1st of this year, our qualification program requirement went into place. This follows the federal regulations that are already set in place, and basically all the qualification program is there's online modules, and then there's a 1 day, because of COVID, we now have it virtual, but a 1 day classroom session that we do live, where it goes through basically all the fundamentals of projects with federal, all the requirements for federally funded projects. It gives you a nice foundation for them when you're administering them. But we do have a website set up. If you go to virginiadot.org and you go to the local assistance webpage, you'll see at the top of the page, kind of like it's a QP that kind of sort of looks like a roundabout. If you click the link just below that, that'll take you to the qualification page. We have a whole list of frequently asked questions that are posted there. We also have a document there that will walk you through setting up your e-learning portal. And we also post our upcoming virtual classroom sessions there, so you can get registered for those. Our next virtual classroom session is scheduled for April 22nd, and prior to taking the virtual classroom session, you do have to finish all the online modules. This qualified staff requirement, the qualification program, it is only required for projects that have federal funds on them. It is recommended, though, for everyone to take it because it is free to all localities and PDCs and everyone. So it is recommended you take it because, again, it does provide a good foundation for locally administered projects and covering all the federal requirements that are out there for them. But if you ever have any more questions and you go to that webpage, you'll actually see I'm listed as the contact person, Michaela McCain. And so you can always send me any questions if the FAQs don't clarify anything or you have anything else that you want to ask. Someone just said, which program is this? This is the qualification program. So there's no money attached to it. It's just a new program that we have that went into place effective January 1st, where you have to have a qualified staff member. So they've had to have gone through this program and completed it successfully in order to administer a federally funded project, which does include TA. All right. The next question we have is, will VDOT do a pre-application evaluation before July 1st?
I assume this question is asking, would we be willing to review a draft? And I think most districts, if you were to meet with them and talk to them, they would be willing to do a site visit with you to talk about a proposed project, a scope, an estimate. I think they would be willing to talk to you. I think it's especially important if you are thinking of VDOT administering the project. You should definitely coordinate with your district office. We have found recently, trying to get agreements done on new projects, that budget is very important, and to get VDOT input and an estimate of their charges is important. We need to also look at scope and termini, and that's where VDOT coordination can be invaluable. And I would also offer that if we have transit authorities or schools that are out there, entities that are not necessarily road builders and sidewalk builders, it's a great opportunity to have BDOT administer those program or projects for you. Because like I said, schools, transit authorities, things like that, if it's a linear project, we have huge amounts of experience. I mean, we can do those projects on your behalf. So coordinate early. You could do that, yes, before July 1st. Now, if the question is, will they evaluate it before July 1st? If you get it in, if you submit your pre-application, actually push the button and submit it June 1st, and I would follow that up with maybe a phone call to let them know, or contact one of us in LAD to let us know you have submitted it early. Yes, we can do that evaluation early, and we can get your validation done prior to August 15th. But I would let us know, because we're not used to getting them that early. But yes, first in, first out. Next question.
I currently coordinate a local Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure grant through a not-for-profit hospital. My organization is not eligible even though our project is.
Actually, it is eligible. The one exception in the federal legislation to nonprofits is if a nonprofit organization is administering a Safe Routes to School program. You can show you are administering the Safe Routes to School regionally or locally. If you are the Safe Routes to School coordinator and a nonprofit, you can apply for federal funding. That said, again, being as you may not be as familiar with federal design standards, federal environmental laws, whatever, you have the option as well to either have VDOT administer the project or to partner with a local government agency. But as a nonprofit administering Safe Routes to School, you are an eligible entity. Like I said, the legislation has all kinds of little loopholes and nuances, so ask the question. Next.
All right. How detailed does the pre-app cost estimate need to be?
We would like to see it as detailed as possible. A lot of times we will get, either a lump sum, or we'll get a lump sum PE, a lump sum right away, and a lump sum construction cost. And that really doesn't help us. Again, we're looking at eligibility. We're looking at what cost are you including in there? If you've got barbecue grills and picnic tables as part of your trail, we can't see that unless you've got it down to a line item. If you've got boat ramps and, amphitheaters as amenities to your trail and you've included them in your cost, we can't see that if it's lump sum. We also, if we think your estimate is low, without seeing the line items, we can't identify if maybe you didn't take into account utility relocation. Maybe you don't have BDOT oversight in there. If it's not broken down, we can't tell if, maybe you did not, include, oh gosh, I don't know, landscaping. You telling us you're going to do, sidewalks with street trees and benches. Well, maybe the cost isn't there. Without line items, we can't tell a lot. And so as much detail as you can provide helps us tremendously. And in the long run, it helps you, because if that full application comes in and you're asking for an amount that is not sufficient, you're starting off behind the 8 ball already. You know, you may get fully funded, but when we find out that the cost is really 3 times what you thought, that fully funding doesn't help you. And when CTB members see, you know, hey, I fully funded that project. Why is it coming back again? I fully funded it last time. They get suspicious. They want it. They feel like, you know, they have fully funded and they try to fully fund these projects. So they're trying to help you. So the more detail you provide us up front, the better estimate you have and the better cost that we can, you know, fund is to your benefit as well as ours. Next.
Okay. Are nonprofits eligible to apply for TA set-aside funds? I'm understanding that they are not eligible, but I am also recalling that the FAST Act may have changed their eligibility in some way.
FAST Act did not change other than it did put the one nuance that I spoke of. It does specifically address safe routes to school coordinators as possible nonprofit groups. So that is the only instance where it may be an eligible entity, is a nonprofit that is running a safe routes to school regional program or local program. Again, I will caution that, you know, nonprofits, it is a difficult situation to administer a federal aid project. You know, street project, like I said, you're talking about AASHTO design standards, Buy America, things that you may not be dealing with day to day, and you're committed to getting this project to construction, meeting all federal requirements within 4 years. It is a big commitment. And, you know, if we find that the project stalls or you give up and just quit and cancel it, you're eligible to, you know, you might have to pay that money back. And that is not a good situation. Neither of us want to see that. So be careful with making that proposal. And like I said, you've got a lot of partners out here that will help. Localities we see a lot of times step up. VDOT is stepping up. So let us help you if we can.
The next question is, where can we locate the request to administer form?
The request to administer form is located on VDOT's TA site. So if you look for transportation alternatives on VDOT's external website, you can find it. We have a link to it that we just added in the last couple months. You can also go through VDOT's external website and look at doing business with VDOT and online forms. We call it our forms library. It's located there as well. If you currently work with VDOT district offices and you know have a project coordinator, they can assist you in getting that as well. Or again, any of us, you know, LAD project program coordinators, me, Jay, Cynthia, we can also assist you in that as well.
All right. Next question. If a project is being partially funded by VDOT, but the locality is the lead applicant, is this project ineligible?
Oh, I think that's a trick question. We would have to look at it. We would seriously have to look at it. That is something that I would talk to your LAD program manager, again, me, Cynthia, or Jay, and let us look at specifics, give us a UPC that we can look at. Because it gets complicated when you start mixing the federal TA money with VDOT funding in the sense that TA has specific eligibilities we can pay for. We need to be able to monitor those costs separate from other costs. And state money, like revenue sharing money, cannot match TA money. Rec access money cannot match TA money. The projects can be funded by both funding sources, but they cannot match one another. So again, we've got to be able to keep the funding sources separate. We've got to be able to identify eligibilities and specific costs that are being paid for. So it gets tricky. We would want to look at that.
Is it correct that the TA pre-application can also be accessed beginning May 17th as well?
Yes, the TA application, the pre-application, the portal will open May 17, which is a Monday. And so you can go in May 17th, and if you have the proper access, like I said, you have to have access to the smart portal as well as access to the TA program. You can go ahead and start work on your TA pre-application May 17th.
Is it possible to see some examples for non-infrastructure grants? I think many of us are applying for Safe Routes to School programs.
The non-infrastructure grants for Safe Routes to School is new this year. Previously, Transportation Mobility Planning Division had handled those, and they were using the remaining safety lieu funds, which were 100% funds. So one change is that the TA money is 80-20. It's not the 100% funds that were used prior. So you would be applying for 80-20 funds, which means a local 20% match would be required. And for non-infrastructure, it would be anything eligible under the federal Safe Routes to School legislation. So it's your educational materials, training materials, bicycles for bike rodeos, materials for walk to school days and promotional activities, helmets, given out to kids for safety programs. Any of your Safe Routes to School activities that were prior, that were eligible, are still eligible. We are just changing the funding source in the sense that we are now switching from the 100% safety lieu funds to the 80-20 TA funds.
One just came in real quick. When will the final application period begin?
You can start working on your final application once your pre-app has been validated. You cannot go out there. There is no blank full application form that you can start working on. It doesn't work that way. Like I said, it has to go through validation and it has to be validated, and that will become your full application. So it's not till you're notified by email through the smart portal that your pre-application has been validated. At that point, you can start on your full application.
Are the estimate and schedule tool forms required at pre-application or required at final application?
The estimate template is not required. It's not mandatory. You have to have an estimate, and you have to submit that estimate with your pre-application, but it does not have to use our tool. We're just trying to help. The scheduling tool, you do have to use our tool. Those time frames that we've put in there are what we have learned over years and years of administering these projects, and we want to see those time frames used in the schedule. Again, it is tentative, you're not tied to it, but we do want to see what calculation and what time frame that produces. So the schedule tool has to be used, and it has to be printed and uploaded as an attachment to your pre-application. So yes, both those tools are required at pre-app.
For LPA planning purposes, if LPAs submit a pre-application date on 7/1/21 fiscal year 22, what is the earliest start date they can enter for the start of the project in the scheduling tool? Or will the tool set the earliest possible start date?
The tool does not provide anything. You can put whatever you want in it. So if you started, let's take an extreme example. Say you've already started design. You plan to come to us with a full set of construction drawings. You could put design started June 1st of 2020. But be realistic. Again, you're just hurting yourself if, we're looking at inflation and costs and changes over time. If you're shortchanging yourself, we don't want to see that. So you can put whatever date you want. You can put, like I said, June 1st of 2020. You could put June 1st of 2024. The form has no restrictions built into it. But again, we're going to look at it, and if we see a June 1st of 2020 date, we will most likely question you. But if you say, hey, we started design back then, we're ready to go, we want to have full construction plans when this money's awarded, that's our plan, then fine. Nothing's going to stop you from that.
All right, okay, so we had 3 questions come in kind of like back to back, all from the same person. So I think they kind of figured out, but we'll still go through them and cover them. It's about third-party match. So can third-party match be in-kind labor? For example, our mayor is not salaried, but can his time be considered in kind? Can the third party be landscaping, for example, that the town pays for directly? And then, so third party is really cash.
Okay, take the easy one first. Cash is not in kind. Cash is just a way of paying for your project, just like anything else. So cash is not in kind, be it local cash, be it donations from, the Historic Society or the Garden Club. Cash is not match as far as third party or in kind. If the town pays for landscaping, let's assume the town is the one administering this project. The town pays for landscaping and donates it to the project, and they don't ask for reimbursement. It is still a cost incurred by the recipient. It is not third party. So that is not eligible match, not eligible third party donation. The first one, can you read me the first one again, Michaela? That one's
Sure.
the hardest.
Okay, so can third-party match be in-kind labor? Our mayor, for example, is not salaried, but can his time be considered in kind?
That one is in that gray area. My first, and I would have to look at it, my first thought would be no. Because he's not salaried, but he is a town, and I say employee, but I know he's not an employee. I know he's not salaried. But he is an official with the town. In fact, he may even be the one that signed the project agreement. So he doesn't fit the definition of a third party in that sense. That would be my assumption. I would have to look at it and maybe get some further guidance, but because he is so closely linked with the town, even though he is volunteering his time, I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that one. Michaela, do you have any thoughts as far as, like, I know you get into some of this with qualifications, and I don't know if you deal with responsible person and all that, but do you have any thoughts?
we deal with a responsible charge person, but again, as for it being like in kind match, I don't know, like you said, I think it would be kind of like a gray area, but we could always get additional clarification on it.
Right.
Hey, Pam, this is Russ. I can give you my thoughts
Good.
and
Thank you.
on this. So here's where I would interpret this. If the mayor is doing something for the project in his capacity as the town mayor, he doesn't get paid anyway. So no, he's doing this as a capacity as a
It's
the
his
town
job.
mayor. So it's his job. But if he is doing this outside the capacity of the mayor, just like if you're the project, if you want to go build a fence for a TA project and you're on Saturday and Sunday, but you work for the locality, but you're volunteering it outside, you're volunteering your time outside your official capacity, yeah, it can count. So that's the way I would see it. Now I would probably want to look at it a little deeper, but that's my gut is capacity as a mayor, no. Outside the capacity, he's going to do something on a Saturday to help out, painting and stuff. Well, he's just a regular citizen doing volunteer work. That's how I would look at it.
I could see that too. I would agree with that. So again, it would require more definition of what he was doing, what activities he's performing. It's just like, a lawyer. If a lawyer is providing a service, appraising easements or deeds or performing a legal function and donating it, then he can use his hourly lawyer rate. But if he's out there planting, a garden, we cannot reimburse it at his lawyer rate, but we could reimburse or count as match. Take that back. We would count as match his time as an unskilled laborer for planting. So it depends on the activities being done. It's never cut and dry. Thank you, Russ. Next.
Next question. How soon after July 1st would a Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure program coordinator be able to begin receiving reimbursements?
Okay, July 1st is the cutoff day for pre-application. So the pre-application would be submitted by July 1st. Then the full application would be submitted October 1st. This is 2021. Then, like I said, our tentative selections, if everything flows properly, our tentative selections will be made in 2022, March of 2022. And the formal approval of the allocations will be made with the department's 6-year program in June of 2022. So the earliest would be July 1st, probably of 2022, and that would only be if federal funds were available. Technically, the federal funds for FY23 would not be available till October 1st of 2022. So it depends on what the availability is. There is a possibility, and again, we would have to have an agreement in place. We would have to have federal authorization in place. All this stuff takes time. We would have to have all the documentation in place. So I would still say you're probably looking at October 1st, 2022.
Are Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure programs beholden to any federal Buy America requirements such as bikes, helmets, etc.?
You're asking me to go into new territory here, but based on my experience with the federal TA infrastructure, I would say yes, that if there is steel and iron involved in the bicycles, and we've had this with bike share programs, and we've done several bike share programs, and yes, there is a Buy America requirement for bicycles. So anything that is steel or iron related would still have to be Buy America. And in fact, we had that issue in one of our projects in Northern Virginia. One of the localities, the supplier was Canadian, and we had an issue with, you know, we need Buy America. So yes, it would have to be meet Buy America.
If the town allocates money in the budget to the EDA, which then funds the third-party contribution and is a legal separate entity, would that qualify?
Wow. EDA being an Economic Development Authority. And you're asking who's going to sign the agreement?
It didn't clarify.
They didn't clarify, but it looked like it was the town. They're talking about the town.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
It looks like it would be the town that would be signing the agreement.
Okay, the EDA would not be an eligible applicant. I do not believe, unless you can show that they fit one of those eligible categories as far as responsible for transportation management and things like that. Right off the top of my head, not knowing the specifics, I would say the EDA would not be an eligible applicant and would not be an eligible, therefore, administrator of the funds. Again, I'm not quite sure I'm following the question. Can you read it again, Michaela?
Yeah, and it looks like Limmel, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Hancock, they asked the question. So you can unmute yourself if you want to clarify better. But the question as written said, if the town allocates money in the budget to the EDA, which then funds the third-party contribution and is a legal separate entity, would that qualify?
Okay, so I think what they're talking about there is third-party contributions. So the town is allocating money to the EDA, and then the EDA is being shown as the donating third party. At first glance, I would say no. I mean, it sounds like ultimately it's the town funding it. They're just using the EDA as a pass-through.
That's correct, Pam. That's how I read it.
So I would have to look at that specifically and know more particulars, but it sounds like we're just bypassing, and ultimately the fund source is the town, so they're not a third party. But again, I would have to know more of the specifics. And again, that's why we have instituted this third party contribution plan, is that, you know, you can fill out the form and then send us a narrative as well. to explain what your proposal is, and we can have the time then to go over it, to talk to you, and to get the particulars, and we can give you a much better answer when we've had time to look at it and to understand it. So talk to us early. I think somebody asked the question, can we get somebody to look at things before July 1st? Questions like this, yes. I mean, send those early. Send an email. I would recommend send it to either myself, Jay, or Cynthia, whichever district you're in, and let us get into that early. Explain to us what the situation is and let us look at it. But at first glance, I would have to say no on that one.
Next question, do you need a sketch for non-infrastructure safe routes to school grant proposals? I feel like some of this is not applicable for such requests.
That would be true for non-infrastructure. And again, depending on what it is, we couldn't cover every scenario. So the system will probably require a sketch, just because that's one of the boxes that we said we need a sketch. So you may need to upload something, but it could be an upload of a sample. Maybe you're talking about a training document. You could show us a sample of your training, what you're proposing to spend money on. You could show us, if you're doing a walk to school or a bike rodeo, you could show us a sketch of what you're thinking of for the bike rodeo. And does it go from here to here? Is it all on the blacktop and behind the school, and you're just drawing or painting lines on it and setting up cones? You can be creative for these non-infrastructure grants. Like I said, unfortunately, we could not prepare for every contingency, so a sketch will be required, but what you submit as that sketch, we will talk to you about. If we feel we need something different, we can contact you during validation. But for non-infrastructure, you're right, it doesn't quite fit the mold. But I think there might be, depending on what it is, something that you could substitute that would help us.
So still on the non-infrastructure application, what type of attachments are needed?
Okay, non-infrastructure. So estimate, sketch, again, because there's, we had to set the system up to accept yes or no. And so something would have to be submitted for the sketch and identified as the sketch. Again, we can be flexible on what that is, and a schedule. Those three things are going to be required in order for you to press the button and for it to submit. But we are flexible in what that actual documentation is. But I'm sure there's something of value that you could share with us about your proposed project.
All right. Would TAP funding be suitable for trail and sidewalk projects driven by the need for ADA compliance?
Yes. We do not participate in the cost of sidewalk or trail repair. If you've got a trail that's 20 years old and it's crumbling, we don't necessarily pay to replace segments of it. Just like sidewalks, we don't replace individual squares of sidewalk. But if you've got a sidewalk that does not meet the current ADA requirements, say it's 3 foot wide, and we want to make it 5 foot wide, and we want to add the accessibility ADA ramps, then you can rehabilitate that whole stretch of sidewalk, but it has to be from A to B, and it has to be logical termini. and we have to tear out and replace that whole piece of sidewalk because it's not ADA compliant, and that could be too narrow. It could be utility poles or light poles in the middle of it. Back in the day, I mean, they put the poles right in the middle of the sidewalk. You don't have enough clearance. So yes, if we're rehabilitating a whole stretch of sidewalk from A to B, that is eligible, or a stretch of trail from A to B that is not wide enough. And we didn't really talk about that, but trails to meet ADA, if it is a multi-use or shared use path, it needs to be 10-foot wide. So if you have a 6-foot wide trail that is meant to be used by bicyclists and pedestrians, yes, you could rehabilitate that to meet ADA requirements.
Can TAP, Safe Routes to School funding, be used for permanent or mobile driver feedback signs, which give motorists feedback on their speed and encourage speed limit compliance?
No, I'm going to say no. And I would probably get further clarification on this just to make sure I'm consistent. But my thought would be, one, they're mobile. So they can be used in multiple locations. They can be used by multiple localities. They can be used all over. So they're not a permanent fixture. They're not, they could be paid for and then stuffed, in a warehouse somewhere. So one, they're mobile, which I don't like. Two, they're giving feedback to motorized transportation, which we focus on non-motorized. So my first stab at eligibility on that would be no. Just like we don't participate in equipment for monitoring trail usage, we don't do, user counters or anything like that. That's a local cost. That's not benefiting, the public. It's benefiting the locality. So, the driver feedback as a safety issue is kind of borderline, but being as it's mobile, I would, my first guess would be no.
Would you please elaborate on the suitability of TAP funding for use on erosion, sediment, or population control projects? For example, how closely connected to transportation infrastructure does the ES pollution control need to be to qualify to use TAP funds?
TAP funds are intended in those categories, the environmental and the wildlife. The intent, and the archaeological as well, is to mitigate the negative impacts of the existing transportation system. So what we're saying here is TAP funds would be eligible to participate in mitigating roadway runoff and roadway runoff that is causing pollution. So is the roadway runoff causing, is that runoff going into a local stream or waterway? And is there evidence that, it's polluting that waterway? Vegetation, Cynthia talked about invasive species, and it has to be, again, within the transportation right of way. So we are, again, mitigating situations directly impacting the existing transportation right of way. So roadway, sidewalks, trails. But again, it cannot be a maintenance activity. It can't be pruning trees as maintenance activities. There has to be a case to show that you are mitigating an adverse impact on the environment. through the transportation network. So again, that would be something I'd like to see ahead of time. I'd like to have a proposal submitted, just a narrative to define what it is. If you've got drawings or anything, even just a sketch on a piece of legal pad or something that you can share with us ahead of time, that if we have any further questions, we can get further interpretation from FHWA if need be, or we can talk to our environmental folks or our hydraulic people. So those we would need to see ahead of time, but again, you would have to be able to make a case that you're mitigating negative impacts from the transportation network.
If it's just a public meeting as opposed to a public hearing, does it still need to be advertised?
Yes. Federal requirements require that it be publicly advertised, that everybody within reason, I mean, we can't knock on everyone's door, but it has to be in a public, advertised in a public manner that we can, you know, reasonably say that the public was advised of this public meeting and this project, and that the locality or whomever was applying for federal funds and what the project was. So it could be a newspaper, it could be website, it can be mailing lists, any combination thereof. It's whatever you would normally do to advertise. But yes, it has to be publicly advertised in some form or fashion. If you have a town, you know, bulletin board or something, if that's how you advertise your, you know, town council meetings and whatever, then, you know, that would, you know, suit, but you have to show that it was publicly advertised. Yes.
Can you discuss the advantages or opportunities for VDOT to perform NEPA on behalf of the localities?
VDOT stepped up back in 2008 and said, you know, environmental NEPA is a very important federal requirement. To fail NEPA or to miss coordination and not properly address the environmental coordination can kill a project. I have had a project where the feds have come in and said this document was not done properly, the coordination was not proper, and they were asked to repay all the funding on that project. So it's very, very critical. It's very important that it be done properly. And VDOT realized that risk. And VDOT has said, we will do the environmental coordination for you. We will ensure that it meets all NEPA requirements. Now, they're not going to do your commitments for you. They're not going to do the additional survey. If it's identified that additional survey is needed, they're not going to do that. They will point out the need for it. And if possible, you know, there might be, you know, some coordination that can be done. I won't say they won't do it, but they will also do it in most cases for reduced cost. It's going to cost less for VDOT Environmental to do it, since they do that every day, than some of the consultant costs that we have seen for providing an environmental document. The thing to understand too with TA projects is these are simple, less complex, less invasive projects. So the environmental document required is usually a minimum programmatic categorical exclusion, which is a one-page document that requires, for the most part, just coordination with other agencies. DHR, Game and Wildlife. There is no environmental study required. It's coordinating with other agencies, doing your water quality permits if required. So I think there's tremendous benefit and value to VDOT doing your environmental document. In fact, we have said we must do it unless you make other arrangements and your proposal is approved by the district environmental office. They need to buy off on what your plan is and how you're going to accomplish it to ensure that it meets NEPA requirements. So again, I think there's tremendous benefit to allowing VDOT to do your environmental work or coordination.
Is the public information meeting required before the final TA application submittal?
Yes. You have to have evidence of the, either evidence of the advertisement or evidence of the meeting included in your final application due October 1st. So you have to show us either an agenda or the advertisement or the screen print of, the website where it was advertised at the, town offices or whatever. We need to see that evidence and it needs to be part of that October 1st final application.
Can we use the council meeting as public input outreach, as the public input / outreach opinion tool?
Say that again?
It says, can we use the council meeting as a public input / outreach opinion tool?
Yes. Yes. In fact, a lot of localities do that. They will use their board meeting or council meeting as a platform for their public information and public participation meeting. The key is it has to be advertised. This project has to be part of the agenda. It cannot be, if you just advertise a council meeting, nobody knows that you're discussing going after federal transportation funds to build a trail. And that's kind of the whole point of it. So part of it has to be advertised and it has to be identified as this is part of the agenda and discussion at that meeting.
If you get partial funding for a project, are you able to apply for the rest in a subsequent round? And if so, should you have made significant progress on the first part prior to submitting another application for funds?
Yes, and yes. Again, we hope that your initial estimate is fairly accurate and that hopefully you have a good idea going into your first application that it's going to cost, $1 million. Now, you may not ask for that full $1 million or 800. Let's say your federal participation is 800,000. It may be to your advantage not to ask for that full 800 at one time. Like Cynthia said, the CTB members, if they want to fund it at all, have to fund half of it. So you're asking a board member or CTB members collectively to give you at least $400,000 at one time. Depending on what district you're in, that might be asking for a lot because they might have 30 applications to consider. And if everybody's asking for grand amounts, they may not be able to spread it as widely as they would like. So you might find yourself asking for PE and right-of-way costs up front and waiting and applying for that construction funding in the next round. You should have all those costs identified on that initial application so that the board member knows what you're doing. They see, okay, we're committing to 800,000, but they only need 300,000 right now. So, okay, we'll do that. We'll give them 300 now. And we know that next time they're going to come back asking for more, but that's okay. We'll commit to that. We like this project. So that's fine. Be upfront with it. Do a good estimate. Don't lowball the estimate. show them what they're getting into. They have no problem. If they like the project, they have no problem committing to it. But be upfront so they know what they're committing to. And yes, you the idea is that if this is your plan, that you ask for PE and right away up front, that by the next cycle, which is at least a year, year and a half down the road, that you have made your way through and done. You've got, environmental is done, 30% plans are done, your right-of-way survey's done, you know exactly what parcels you need, you're ready to go on that. That you have done and made progress. So yes, scoring on that second application will be based on the progress being made. And we didn't really touch on that, but when you're coming in with a supplemental application if you're asking for money on an existing project, one, they want to know why did we not know about this before? Or if we did, okay, that's fine. And they want to know what progress are you making? And just because you need more money doesn't mean that pushed out your 4 years. No, the expectation is you're plugging along and you're making progress and you're still going to meet that 4 years. You just need more money. So yes, to both of those questions.
Who is the oh, sorry, you ready for the next one?
Yep.
All right, someone said, who is the contractor that's willing to donate the 75,000 aggregate in Jay's example?
Very funny, haha. But it does happen. It does happen. It really does. So next one.
What is the earliest date funds can be used for non-infrastructure application?
I think we've already addressed that one.
Okay, for non-infrastructure?
Yeah, non-infrastructure is the same as infrastructure. It's October 1st of 2022 if the project is selected.
Okay. To be ADA compliant, can trails be 5 foot wide or must they be wider? I believe you addressed this also.
We have, but the issue here is who are your users? And this is where we get into conflicts because the initial application will come in saying, I want to do a shared use path and I want bicyclists and pedestrians. And I might even allow horses on it. And then they find out how much it's going to cost. And then all of a sudden it shrinks down to a 5 foot wide sidewalk. Well, it makes a difference with who your users are. If your plan is this is part of your citywide trail that has bicyclists and pedestrians and horses, you can't shrink it down to a 5 foot sidewalk after you've already committed to, a 10 foot wide trail. So the idea is who are your users? If it is a pedestrian only facility, if you intend for it to connect schools and, connect grocery stores and churches and whatever, and it's meant to be a pedestrian facility, then it can be 5 foot wide. If it is intended to be a shared use path and recreational in nature to some extent, then it should be the 10 foot wide. And again, you have to look at too, what is it connecting to? I talked about leaving users stranded. We don't want to see that. We don't want to see going from a shared use path to a sidewalk because it's cheaper. You're leaving your bicyclists hanging. So all that comes into play. Next.
Does a regional plan fulfill the multi-jurisdictional coordination requirement?
Remember I talked about a sliding scale. If I were doing a sliding scale, that would be way at the bottom because you can have a project as multi-jurisdictional in a regional plan, and you haven't talked to them at all, and there's no coordination that's been had. So it would score very low. Now, if you tell me you've had coordination meetings and you're working together to design and whatever, then yeah, it'll boost it. But just to say it's in the plan as multi-jurisdictional is not going to score very high.
Regarding regional significance, what if the school system is being by the county, but the school is located within the town limits? Would it be considered a regional significance if the town wants to put a crosswalk?
No, regional significance is looking at things like the Capitol Trail, the what is it, Ashland to Petersburg Trail, the Tobacco Heritage Trail. They're looking at regional significance as far as benefits to the area as a whole. More in an economic, tourism way. I mean, smaller projects could show some regional significance, but not a crosswalk, I don't think. No, we're looking for larger there.
All right. The last question.
Yay.
Yeah. Are regional applications actually more competitive? Or do you just want to know that the appropriate coordination is being done if it is a regional project?
Regional significance is a new scoring criteria. Again, if you've applied before, we remove the ability to administer as a scoring criteria. So we were looking at what other factors might come into play and draw some interest. And regional significance came up as a way to identify and maybe attract. We're hoping to attract some larger projects or pieces of projects that tie trails together, that promote regional trails and tourism and economic benefit. We're looking for that as a way to attract some of these projects because I think as a whole, Virginia, part of the TA program is we're looking as a state to use these funds to the benefit of the state as a whole or to benefit beyond a community. So we want to look for investment opportunities where we can fund multi-regional, multi-jurisdictional trails or facilities that would benefit the region rather than just a small community. It's just an addition. It's not to say that we don't want to fund great local projects. We do, but we would also like to be able to invest in maybe some larger projects that can benefit the state as a whole. And again, it doesn't have to necessarily just be a trail. It could be something that increases, a historic district or historic destination as well. So there are a lot of ways to look at that. And if one last thing, if we have any district members out there listening, that's where we can use help out in the districts is to maybe identify some of these larger projects and put the word out that this is a funding opportunity, that they would have to scale a project down. We could only do a piece of a trail or a piece of something much larger. But by doing pieces, you get the larger whole, and maybe we can do the connections, the spur trails. We aren't a huge funding source, but maybe we could do some spur trails and connect to these larger trails and still, benefit from that connection. But we need our districts and our localities, out there looking for these opportunities to get these applications in. So I just put that out there. Anything else?
I do not see any more questions, and so I think
It's probably just the three of us on the line anyways.
Let me see. I can look at how many participants are still on.
It's 104.
Okay, yeah, so we've lost some, but that's fine. Okay, so with that though, we will go ahead and wrap up. We did record this webinar today. It generally takes us about a week to get everything finalized and posted to the website. Once it is posted, I will send this out to everyone who was registered. And also, I know I had a bunch of people that were emailing me this morning that didn't get a chance to register, so I forwarded them the information. I've added you to my list that I will use to send it out, notifying you that everything has been posted to the website. So all of this will be available for playback if you want to rewatch it, or if you want to forward it out to any of your other coworkers or staff that may not have been able to attend today with us live. I do want to thank our presenters, Pam, Cynthia, and Jay, for taking the time to go through all of this. I thank everyone for all of your questions. I think it really helped add to the discussion today for additional clarification. If you ever have any additional questions or think of anything, please feel free to reach out to your district contacts, whether it be your project coordinator or Jay, Cynthia, or Pam. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful day. And we will let you go. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all for attending.